down your second screen. Stop worrying about the fact you haven't seen a star in like 15 years. Do that tax return at the very last minute. It's time to look at some cool indie games that'll take over your life for dozens of hours instead. Alright, you can go on your phone if you're watching this on the big TV, I guess. Let's get the obvious one out of the way early, just in case you've been dead for 10 years. Stardew Valley is a sandbox farming RPG and life simulator from Concerned Ape that blends chill rhythms with deep systems. You inherit your grandfather's rundown farm and are free to farm, fish, forage, mine, befriend townsfolk, tackle quests, or just wander Pelican Town at your own pace. There isn't a strict ending date, and players define their own goals, be it restoring the community centre, maxing relationships, or perfecting a farm layout. In terms of completion length, this one doesn't have a single fixed runtime because of how open it actually is. Reaching the traditional end of the main storyline typically takes around 50 to 60 hours for focused players. Achieving all unlocked content as such and a 100% perfection score usually runs like 150 to 200 hours or more. Even guys like Bobby Lee have spent hundreds of hours in this game. Mechanically, Stardew systems are deceptively simple on the surface. You plant crops, water them, raise animals, and dungeon dive. But they interlock with seasonal shifts, NPC schedules, random events, and crafting trees in a way that continually makes you just lock the hell in. Whether you're tending crops at dawn or spelunking through mines at midnight, there's always something to do or a slightly better farm layout to chase. There is a sea of content here. Developed by the same guys as the awesome The Messenger, Sea of Stars is a turn-based indie RPG from Sabotage Studio that feels like a love letter to the golden age of 16-bit classics. You play as dual Solstice warriors, Valaire and Zale, who combine sun and moon magic to face off against ancient horrors and unravel a story that's part high fantasy, part bay adventure. The pixel art and soundtrack will be pretty nostalgic for SNES fans, but there's enough modern polish and exploration and combat to keep it from feeling like, just nostalgia bait. So, how long is it? Well, in terms of completion length, most players take about 25 to 30 hours to finish the main story, but including side content and post-game stuff stretches it into the 30 to 40 hour range, depending on how deep you go. If you really want to turn this thing inside and out, completionist runs, they can take about 40 to 50 hours if you chase every achievement and secret. The game itself is of course also a bit of a banger. Combat is tactical without being, too dense and overwhelming, with timed button presses and party coordination other than just, grinding forever. Exploration feels rewarding with puzzles and world traversal that respect your time, while still offering that sense of discovery that makes JRPG so enduring for so many decades. Some players feel the narrative beats are just a tad too familiar, but overall it's tight, heartfelt, and just long enough to justify its indie credentials and it taking over your life for a couple of weeks. A bona fide indie classic, Terraria is a 2D sandbox action-adventure game that sits somewhere between Minecraft's freedom and a classic Metroidvania's sense of progression. You are dropped into a procedurally generated world with minimal guidance and have to survive, explore, and just figure out how everything works. What begins as digging tunnels and crafting basic gear steadily escalates into large-scale boss fights, biome corruption, NPC town management, and elaborate build projects that can swallow entire evenings. Someone's got to build Walter's house from Breaking Bad, right? Roughly 40 to 50 hours is a common estimate for completing a standard playthrough that reaches the game's core ending and defeats the main bosses. However, that number does rise quickly if you really want to dive deep into this world. Expert and master modes, post-game events, and world-specific challenges can push a thorough run into the 80 to 120 hour range, while true completionists regularly exceed that. Like Stardew Valley, Terraria's real length is defined more by ambition than a credits roll. And it rarely gets boring during that whole time because combat evolves dramatically over time, shifting from clumsy early encounters to fast, screen-filling, bullet-hell boss fights that'll make your eyes go a bit weird. The crafting tree is famously dense and a bit confusing, but feels fun once you get to grips with it. Terraria is a game that'll constantly be reinventing itself as you play it. Next up, my second favourite thing to do with a RIM. RimWorld is a colony management simulator built around procedural storytelling rather than just straight up winning. You guide a small group of crash-landed survivors as they attempt to stay alive on a hostile, randomly generated planet. Every colonist has distinct traits, skills, relationships, and psychological breaking points, which means there will be disasters, but always varied disasters though. A bad harvest can spiral into starvation, mental breaks, social fights, and catastrophic chain reactions. Yay! Reaching a conventional ending, such as building a ship and escaping the planet, typically takes around 60 to 80 hours for experienced players, often much longer for newcomers. However, many players never see an ending at all. Long-running colonies frequently exceed 150 to 300 hours, especially when experimenting with different storytellers, difficulty settings, or biomes. With mods in the mix as well, playtime can balloon way beyond that. And all while having the graphics of your favourite forgotten browser game from 2005. The game's stats comes from how its systems overlap and just how deeply it can pull you in, and how many dudes you want to eat. Combat obviously isn't Devil May Cry, but it can be pretty panic-inducing and pretty tense despite, the graphics, as I mentioned before. RimWorld is about watching a fragile society wobble, adapt, and occasionally collapse in memorable ways. Proves that losing can be just as entertaining as success. Next up, not that microwave meal company that pretty much every YouTuber is promoting these days. Factorio is a logistics and automation game that'll have you Pepe Silvering in about, 5 hours. You crash land on an alien planet and start by hand mining iron and copper, only to slowly replace every manual action with conveyor belts, inserters, trains, robots, and sprawling factory lines. The core appeal is just how deep into this you can go, spotting inefficiencies, redesigning layouts, and watching production numbers climb as your factory evolves into a continent-spanning machine is always a fun time. Launching a rocket and finishing the game typically takes around 40 to 60 hours for new players. That figure drops significantly with experience, but also rises if you play cautiously or rebuild often. Post-completion play, harder presets, and large-scale mega-base projects regularly push total playtime into the 100 to 300 hour range, but some guys can easily put thousands of hours into this one. What sets Factorio apart is how relentlessly it builds on itself. Every solution introduces a new problem. Power generation leads to pollution, pollution attracts enemies demand better defenses, which requires more resources, which requires more automation, and so on. Combat is present, but it's kind of secondary, and you can just turn it off if you want. It is a dense game, but if you're looking to escape your monotonous job of being a cog in a machine, put some cogs in machines here instead. At least you don't have to deal with Laura from marketing. Can she please shut up? Kenshi is a brutally hands-off open-world RPG that doesn't care if your hands come off. You start as a nobody in a world that does not scale to you. Getting beaten up makes you tougher, losing fights teaches you when to run, and every small improvement feels like you've just done a 5k while James Corden holds you by the ankles. If we're talking just how long this thing actually is, Kenshi is almost impossible to pin down. It's just not that kind of game really. A focused playthrough where you establish a stable squad, a base, and play about with major factions usually takes around 80 to 120 hours. Sandbox heavy runs, large scale base building, or faction conquering playstyles routinely stretch well beyond 200 hours, especially for players who embrace the game's slow, emergent pacing. Mechanically, Kenshi blends squad-based RPG systems with survival sim elements. Skills level through use, injuries are persistent and often debilitating, and even basic travel can turn into a disaster if you're underprepared or underlegged. The world itself is the star. You've got strange biomes, hostile societies, and fragments of lore scattered through ruins. Kenshi's tales of desperate escapes, doomed settlements, and characters who only become legends because they survived long enough to earn it could be your next obsession. Darkwood is a top-down survival horror game that embraces atmosphere and making you feel very itchy and cold. Set in a warped, slowly encroaching forest, it drops you into a hostile environment with minimal explanation and very little hand-holding. You scavenge during the day, gradually mapping the world and uncovering fragments of a deeply unsettling story, then barricade yourself indoors at night and hope you've prepared well enough to last until morning. In terms of how long this will take you, a standard first playthrough usually lands around 15 to 20 hours, depending on how cautious you are and which narrative paths you follow. Players who explore thoroughly, experiment with different endings, or replay sections to understand the world more fully often push closer to like 25 to 30 hours. It is not the longest game of today, but it will pull you right in and refuse to let go, just like the enemies you encounter. Combat is stiff and uncomfortable by design, weapons are unreliable, and fights are best avoided unless it is absolutely necessary. The real tension comes from deciding what to carry, where to explore, when to retreat, and how much risk you're willing to tolerate before night falls. Darkwood is the kind of horror that lingers long in your memory after you stop playing, and it's even got a second game coming out soon too. Hopefully the dogs are a bit nicer in that one. Dave the Diver is a genre-blending management adventure that somehow balances chilled-out vibes with compulsive progression and sushi. By day, you dive into the Blue Hall, spearfishing for increasingly exotic sea life while dodging predators and managing limited oxygen. By night, you help run a restaurant, turning your haul into profit, upgrading gear, and expanding operations. It sounds like a lot, but it probably will grip you straight away. And it will have your attention for a pretty long time, as you'll be finishing the main story, typically in around 25 to 30 hours, and that's for most players. That comfortably stretches to like 35 to 45 hours if you engage with side missions, optional bosses, and the game's steady drip feed of new mechanics. Post-story content, upgrades, and completionist goals can make this one much longer too. What makes Dav the Diver work so well is that there's always the next thing. Just as one system starts to feel familiar, the game introduces a new twist without overwhelming you. It's not especially punishing or that dense really, but that's part of its appeal. Dave the Diver keeps things moving, and you'll keep moving onto your couch into a horizontal position to lose 7 extra hours into this one over and over again. Great on the Steam Deck or Switch. UFO 50 is less a single game and more a curated archive of alternate history design. Framed as a lost library from a fictional 1980s developer, it contains 50 complete games, each with its own mechanics, genres, and tone. Some feel immediately familiar, while others are strange or deliberately just, they don't really want you to play them. Part of the appeal is learning how each game works, often without tutorials, in a way that mirrors how older games expected players to experiment and fail. Because of that structure, how long you will actually play this one for varies quite a lot, but you will be at it for a while. Sampling the entire collection properly usually takes around 25 to 40 hours, assuming you move on once you've grasped each game's core idea. However, fully beating a large portion of the library, including chasing high scores, hidden mechanics, and true endings, can easily push total playtime beyond 100 hours. What elevates UFO 50 isn't just basic nostalgia alone, but the fact that everyone can find at least a handful of games they'll really love. There are full platformers like Barbuta, arcade shooters like Avianos, weird long-form strategy experiments like Grimstone, and genuinely deep systems that could have been standalone releases. Some games you'll bounce off in 10 minutes and that's fine, others will eat entire evenings and that's how it will take over your life, at least for quite a long time. Even if only a handful really click with you, the value proposition here is still absolutely mental to me. Eastward is a narrative-driven action RPG that wears its influences openly, blending Zelda-style exploration with a heavy focus on character and world-building. You follow John, a gruff miner, and Sam, a mysterious child with strange abilities, and it's kinda like The Last of Us, but not really. The combat is straightforward, but it's clearly in service of the story rather than the main attraction. And it is a beefy boy. A typical playthrough of the main story runs around 30 to 35 hours, largely driven by dialogue-heavy sequences and scripted story beats. If you want to dabble in optional areas, side conversations, and the in-game RPG Earthborn, that can push closer to 40 hours, though it's not designed for extensive replay in the same way as some of the other games I've chatted about today. The pixel art is dense, expressive, and bloody lovely. Environments are packed with small details, and the soundtrack does a lot of emotional lifting. It is deliberately paced, sometimes to a fault, with long stretches focused on conversation rather than action. If you're looking for systems to optimize or mechanics to master, it can feel a bit restrictive, but if you're in the mood for a guided journey with a clear beginning, middle, and end that'll grab you for dozens of hours, Eastward delivers a polished, confident experience that might just punch you right in the stomach. Project Zomboid, that's another one. I just didn't want to talk about it again. I've talked about it loads of times and on other videos and other channels. What other super long, super in-depth, super absorbing indie games do you recommend that I should maybe put in another video? Drop them down in the comments down below. I've been Jimmy for Vault to Vault. It's been good to have you, and I'll catch you.